organization, and I'm on the board there now in New London. And just I've been making myself available and open, and some of the conversations I've had with people just are so, I don't know, like sad and hurtful. And I know I need to do Today I'm so excited. I have my friend and colleague, previous colleague, Reverend Terrlyn Curry Avery, PhD. So I met her and knew her when I was working at New London High School, maybe like 20 some years ago. And I was working as a speech pathologist, and Terrlyn, my friend Dr. Reverend Terrlyn, was working as the psychologist, and she just was smart and sharp, and so I have gotten to know her, and her kids were babies then, and now they're grown young women, gorgeous girls. And she has just written a book that's called Dismantling Racism, and this work began
in 2020, actually.
2020, yes. And what a rough year that was.
Yes, it was.
Oh, what a rough year that was.
For many reasons, yes.
So please, I'm so glad that you were able to carve out just a little bit of time for me to come and share some of your little pearls of wisdom. And just want to begin by saying thank you. And thank you for the important work that you're doing. And racism, it's institutional racism that we really, really, really need to understand, right?
Well, it's institutional racism, but in order for us to understand institutional racism, we have to understand our own racist views and beliefs, because there are a lot of implicit biases that we have that show up every day that we don't even realize. And so in my book is really talking about healing from the inside out.
And how do we do that, Terrlyn?
So one of the things that we do is, I know in 2020 a lot of people said, I'm ready to dismantle racism because
of George Floyd.
Because of George Floyd. And George Floyd wasn't the first time we'd seen these things happen, but it just shook people in an interesting dynamic way.
It was compelling because it was videotaped and mama,
right? It was so graphic, it was horrific. And while we had seen other black men in particular being just shot on camera, we had seen that before. This was so heinous. So one of the things that happened is that we had COVID, the pandemic COVID.
So we had some downtime. It gave us some time to think about things a little bit more, right?
Time to think about things, and we wanted to get out of the house as well too, because a part of what happened during the protests is that people just wanted to be out and in things. But I also think that people were really concerned about what was happening in the world.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that happened for me is that many of my white colleagues would come to me and say, Terrlyn, I don't know what to do. What should I be doing here? And saying, I didn't know it was this bad. And of course, from the perspective of an African-American person, I was saying, why didn't you know it was this bad? This is my lived experience. Every day you hear these things on the news, but what happens is we get to bury our heads in the sand.
Right.
And when George Floyd was murdered, people knew that they couldn't continue to bury their heads in the sand. So as a result, this book actually started out as a book on faith, actually. Faith with getting through COVID. But I realized that, I don't know if you will remember this, when we worked together, I was doing some work in the high school around courageous conversations about race.
I do remember.
And after I left the high school, I started traveling the country working with educators, doing courageous conversations about race, because I worked with a gentleman named Glenn Singleton. So I did that work while I was getting my divinity degree. And then I took a step back and got the divinity degree, started pastoring a church, was doing some work around the wounds of religion, doing coaching with people about manifesting their greatness, et cetera, et cetera. But then I could not turn a blind eye to what was happening in the world. And like I said, people were coming saying, Terrlyn, what can I do?
Well, we want to know, and we want to do better. I mean, people honestly do. I mean, some people don't, but most people I know do.
Right? I think that people are well intention, with wanting to do better. And so specifically, I want to just say, I think for white people, the many that I know want to do better but don't know what to do. And I think for people of color, we're so tired of talking about it and having to feel like that we're the weight, that we're the ones who have to carry the burden.
It's our responsibility.
And so in the book, what I did was I wrote a book, and the book is actually for all people, but particularly I'm talking to white people about be committed. Don't just let 2020 happen. Be angry about it, but be committed. So I talk about what can you do to be committed.
And I liked that about your book. I thought it was very academic in its approach. Like, these are some steps. These are some basic things that you can do. This is how you can move the needle a little bit further in the right direction.
Yes, because the other thing is, again, people can be well-intentioned, but they still continue to make mistakes. And what I want folks to know is that this is indeed a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
You can't be excited about it in 2020 and think that everything is all better, because it's not.
Well, I kind of think that, the way that our society has been somewhat vitriol lately, that the pendulum has swung a little bit in the reverse direction.
Yes.
And what was not acceptable even 22 or 3 years ago has become almost the norm. People just, and I think partially because of the pandemic, I think people just, they get angered more quickly in the responses.
And really there was an awakening a few years ago that it's okay for people just to do and say whatever they want to do and say. But by and large, though, the people that I tend to work with want to know what to do. The issue is, too, and this is part of what the book is all about, is maintaining your commitment, maintaining your faith that, one, we can dismantle racism, because a lot of times people would say, but Terrlyn, that's too overwhelming to think about dismantling. And I will say, do what you can in your corner of the world. So the book is designed to encourage people, to give them steps to say, you can do this. If you put the right tools into place, and then you examine your own stuff, right? Because it's important for us to think, well, what are my prejudices? What are my things that I'm unintentional about? How are some ways that I benefit from my privilege, and I want to keep my privilege, therefore I'm a little scared about doing this work? Or, this is something that I hear all the time, I'm afraid I'm going to make a mistake.
And we all make mistakes all the time, so it's better to make a mistake and apologize, right?
And that sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? Because I will tell you, that's the thing that I say to folks, and particularly white folks, because I want to say that many of the people who come into my class or programs that I offer are white individuals who want some help and some guidance with this. And I will say, you're going to make a mistake. If you're a parent, don't you make mistakes as a parent? All the time, and our kids will tell us about the mistakes
they give us good feedback.
Indeed they do. But the idea is to keep going. And so I encourage people to connect with somebody that can help you walk this journey. And I think it's really helpful to do interracial connections, because I've also run into situations. I do a lot of engagements now where I'll speak to people, and there are a lot of white people who are doing this work on dismantling racism, so I'm really happy about that. But one of the things that I noticed actually in a recent conversation with a group of white people, so white people can do the work and they need to do the work together, but there also needs to be another voice in there, because sometimes the thinking may be just a little bit skewed. It needs to be tweaked just a little bit. So good intentions sometimes are not always the answer. You need the correct training.
I used to have a priest that used to say, the road to hell is paved by good intentions.
Yes,
right?
Indeed.
Right?
Indeed.
So let's talk about the real pragmatic components of it. So this affects our schools, it affects our housing, it affects our economics, it affects our businesses.
Education.
Right.
And that's the thing, too, that I think is really important. So we see these disparities and all the things that you just listed. But one of the things that's really important is for white people to understand how racism impacts you. Because sometimes people will say, well, that's not really affecting me. But yes, it actually affects your dollars and cents. So I'll give you a really good example.
Yeah, please.
Both my girls attend historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs. Last year, there were a number of bomb threats So what happens when there are bomb threats? And I mean repeatedly.
So they evacuate.
Throughout, they evacuate. You have to call in the bomb squad. You have to call in the FBI. You call in the local police. Whose tax dollars are paying for all of that?
It's our tax dollars, and then the kids are missing out on the education.
The kids, exactly. And in addition to that, I remember one of the times there were all these companies who had come to the school so that they could look for their next employees.
Oh,
because
gee.
and so they had to shut it down. So now you've cost this company who's paid airfare, hotel fare to come to the school, and now they can't even do what they came to the school to do. So it really impacts us all, but there's another way it impacts us. It impacts us from an emotional and a spiritual place.
Of course.
And that's a hard place to be in. And with the people that I work with who really want to do this, they suffer. They are feeling guilty and ashamed and all of that, and there's such pain. So I walk them through a journey. You don't need to be in that place of guilt and shame. That won't serve you, and it won't serve me. So it's important for us to walk through this journey together with you, getting some guidance and some training on, then how do I use my skills to dismantle racism? You're using it right now on this show. Right?
Okay.
You're all about storytelling.
Right.
So it's not like you have to go out here and pound down doors.
No.
But it's the day-to-day activities that we engage in. Your audience that's listening, they'll listen to this, and prayerfully, the people who are listening will learn some things and say, I want to do more.
Well, and I never thought about it that way. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who happens to be African American and also Cherokee Indian, and she was telling me the story, and I never thought about this. Maybe I shared this with you previously about the teenage births. So 14, 15-year-old young women that become parents and how their development is arrested, and they then don't parent as well as they would if they had been given like another 10 or 15 years of life before they became a parent, and kind of how that perpetuates a cycle of lack of development. And a lot of times, from what she was telling me, it might be families of people of color, right?
Well, and so I would say in certain areas as well, right? So let's talk about these disparities.
Yeah.
So if you think about when you put a group of people together and they're in impoverished areas, right? So we talk about the housing disparities, the educational disparities, and then if people are not getting the right education even on how to parent or the right education on how to protect oneself from having multiple babies. The cycle continues. And what we do is we blame those individuals rather than teaching them or rather than offering them opportunities to think about, how do I work? How do I go farther in life? People see their environments and they learn from their environments. So whether they're in a privileged one or an impoverished one, because not every African American person has children
of course
at 15,
not. And I didn't mean to.
No. I know that you don't mean that. So I'm just
clarifying
that. And so I think that we want to look at those disparities. But here's how this works. So they particular groups of people are put in these low-income areas, for instance. And so things are limited for them. They don't have the privileges that we have. They don't get to walk on a nice beach and a boardwalk, right? It's not around them. And I say that because of where I love walking. I love walking on that boardwalk, right? And every time I walk on that boardwalk, I look at who's missing.
Right.
That's an important thing for people who want to do this work, to say who's missing.
I think about that all the time.
Yeah. Yep. And so, Kate, if we take, now you're living where there's housing disparities. You're living where the medical care is not that great. You know, then we translate that into what's happening in the schools. And I saw it happening in the schools. People make assumptions about kids who live in certain areas, and there were some great teachers in our school system. And then there were others who didn't understand the battles that these kids had to face every single day.
Just to get there.
Just to get to school. And by battles, you know, people, we don't have enough time to talk about what those battles are. But just in terms of talking about the differences that exist for privileged folks versus folks who are not privileged, their battles or their navigational tools, such as I get to school late because I'm taking care of my siblings. I have to get them to school before I come to school. Well, the elementary school opens at a later time than the high school.
Right.
But if you are a teacher and you don't understand that, and you're marking those students off, or you're sending them to in-school suspension because you don't understand their life, I saw it happening too much. One day I was walking in school, and this young lady said to me, when I said, why are you walking the halls and you're not in school? She said, my teacher said people like me don't go to college.
Excuse me.
I was horrified. I was horrified that someone would tell a child that. And so there are differences. These differences show up with our expectations. Even when I would sit in a meeting as a school psychologist, I would sit in those planning meetings. I would see a student with a C, and people would say, oh, you're doing great. And I would say, no, they're not doing great. Not if that student can do better. If that's all they can do, that's fine. But this is how this happens in the education system. Our expectation for children of color are different. If you are not cognizant of your implicit biases, you won't even recognize that you're doing it. And so when I worked in the high school, that was one of the things I tried to do, was to show people, like, wait a minute. And I have seen some brilliant students. They may be acting out in the classroom, but they are brilliant minds. And just as an FYI, when I was hired to work at New London High School, you know why the special ed person hired me? Because as a clinical psychologist, I get to diagnose in a way that school psychologists can't.
Right.
So she said, we have too many Black and brown students who are diagnosed emotionally disturbed. And she said, you have a clinical degree, and I want you to go in and take a look at those students.
What did you find?
And so, of course, I found that there was an overdiagnosis of emotionally disturbed. And so then those students were put into special ed, right? They're put into special services because now they have a check mark. No, their life circumstances so in the education system, we call it socially maladjusted, right? So there may be some things to happen that they're responding to, but that does not make them emotionally disturbed.
No, of course not.
And some of the kids who they would say were emotionally disturbed, I never had one problem with them. Why? Because one, I wasn't afraid of them, like some teachers, and two, I formed a relationship with them.
It's all about relationship.
And when you form that relationship, you can get anything you want from students. They will rise to the occasion. So I've been doing this work of dismantling racism for years, whether it's writing a book or
Formally
teaching or whatever.
right.
Exactly. And so I really just want to encourage your listeners to do what you can, and it does not matter your skin color. But it's about being committed. And it's about saying there's some things that I don't know. Because there are other times I've run into folks who'll say, oh, I know all about it. I have a Black child or grandchild, or my husband is Black, or this or that. And then I'll see them make faux pas all the time. I'll see them make statements that I'm like, well, if you're married to somebody Black, you should know not to say you're so articulate, or you should know not to say you folks, or just little things like that that will make us pause. People of color, when you say it, we're like, what else is getting ready to come out of your mouth? And so you have good intentions, but then now you've created this thing where we don't know. Can I trust you? Can I not? So that's just an example. But there are other things. We talk about how people of color, we talked about how kids who are impoverished have to live their lives. But one thing, and you and I were talking about this before the show, people of color have to navigate their lives in a very special way.
Yes.
And so an example of that is something that just happened to me recently, because I have to think about my Blackness all the time. It's like putting on my clothes. I have to think about that for my own safety and security. So something happened where, we're in the rural area where we are, and somehow a mouse got in my car, in the driveway. I was actually in my garage. And so I opened the door and I see this confetti, and I'm like, what? like what happened?
Yeah.
But it has to be a mouse, right?
Right.
So, I drive out of the driveway, and I'm like kind of scared because it's this thing going to run out somewhere. So I get out and I pull it into the driveway, and I said, you know what? While I'm cleaning out the car, I'm going to blast my music. So if this thing is in here, it's going to get out.
Yep.
And I'm like banging the seats, because if it's under the seats, I want it to run out. So I'm blasting the music, and my daughter says, Mom, turn the music down. What if the neighbors call the police? I said, I'm on my property, and it's not like the house is like right here. I mean, it's across the street or it's over a little bit. And she says, yeah, but they might call the police. So my daughter has to think about this. She has anxiety around what happens if the police show up.
Right. They're like, hey, lady, why are you blasting your...
Would you even think about that if you went into your house and you turned on the music?
No.
Exactly.
But I did have a friend staying with me for a while. He was between houses kind of thing. And we have a neighborhood kind of list thing. So I sent a message to my neighbor saying that my friend is going to be staying in my room, spare room in the house, please.
And this is a friend of color?
Yes.
Yeah. But
Please.
Would you have done that if it was a white person?
No.
Exactly.
But I wanted him to be safe.
I know, and,
right.
and that's
and
the
I was
point.
like, please give him the, good neighbor welcome.
That is absolutely the point.
And I was humbled to do it, and my neighbors were very warm and receptive towards him. But yeah, I had.
But you had to warn them, and that's what my life is like. So if I go into a place, I have to be mindful. I'm the only black person in here.
Right.
Right. It's I told a friend of mine one day. We were up in Newport, and we were in this really nice area that she wanted to take me and show me. She just wanted me to look out over the cliffs. Well, when we pulled into the area, it said residents only. And so I said, we can't park here.
Sure?
We can't go in here.
Yeah.
And she's a white woman who lives in the area. She said, oh yeah, it's fine. I said, see, you can do that. But I could never walk in this place where it says residents only, because first of all, they're going to assume that I don't live here, even if I do, and that's a privilege that you have. And she thanks me for it, because she also happens to have a son of color, and she had some conversations with him when she got home about it, because he goes through different things than she goes through.
So did he say, "Oh yeah, Mom"?
Well, he did, and he said you should not have put her in that position.
Oh.
Where now she was uncomfortable, but I was fine. I was with her, so I was like, you know what? I'm with you, and if they say anything, right? But here I am, a grown woman.
No, I know.
And I'm having to navigate this.
I know.
Every single day. If I go in a store and I pick up something,
they're gonna watch you.
I'm gonna make sure that you see me put that back. When my kids were little, they do what all kids do. You know how you go up to the cash register and they have all the things there for the kids to take.
It's tempting.
And so I would always say to them, you put that back. I don't want anybody to think that you're taking anything. And so in one of my trainings, this lady said, well, but aren't you perpetuating racism because you're teaching them to be fearful? I said, I'm teaching them to save their lives, right? So there's a difference that I have to engage in a different way with my children. And it's sad. And yes, maybe it does perpetuate a racist system, but I have to look out for my children's lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I love the fact that my kids go to historically black colleges. Why?
They're safer.
They're safer, and they are also grounded in who they are.
Nice.
Because, see, I don't let other people's limitations limit what I do in terms of where I'm going to go in life. But at the same time, I figure out how to navigate it, right?
Right. So powerful, so important, but so tiring too.
It is tiring, which is why a lot of people opt out of this, work. Even people of color said to me, after this, they said, I kind of had my head buried in the sand because you have to deal with this navigation. So they are also like, I don't feel like fighting this on a formal level because I have to deal with it every day. But none of us can afford to bury our heads in the sand.
No.
I need everybody to jump on board with this movement to dismantle racism. And while, I went to divinity school, so I thought, okay, God, you must be calling me to do wounds of religion, because that's out there too. But then I realized I can't stop doing this work on a formal level. I am called to this work, and I think at this point I'll be doing it to the day I die.
And you have a class that you're going to be teaching, and it's called?
A blueprint for ending racism.
A blueprint.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little snippet of what that would look like, or how that's going to be?
It's a 6-week course, and it's offered on Wednesdays from 11 to 12:30, and it's online, so you don't even have to leave your home for it. But in the 6 weeks, we're going to be looking at what racism cost you. We're looking at how to overcome the fear of getting it right, how to stop racism in its track. Do this, not that, because most white people are always saying to me, just tell me what to do. And so I have a whole segment on that. But you have to, I also can't tell you everything that needs to be done as well. You have to learn.
Well, you have to learn.
And then it's
you have to
also
practice too,
the
right?
last class. Exactly. And the last class is how do you become an ally and do this work. So I would love for people to go to my website, which is sacredintelligence.com, or they can just look my name up and they'll find the website as well. But go to the website and they can just click on the links there and find out about the course. They can find out about how to buy the book on dismantling racism to get them started.
Hold that up again?
Yes, the book on dismantling racism, healing separation from the inside out, because I talk and hear about what you, the individual reader, has to do to get through this process of dismantling racism. And I do it in a way that's loving while at the same time holding you accountable for it. But the 6-week course starts September 14th.
That's coming up. That's
it's
just a month away.
Coming up. So I want to encourage people to go to the website and sign up for it. And also, I have a show that
I just wanted to talk about that. The talk radio show, Thursday mornings at 11 o'clock.
At 11 o'clock.
And how do we dial in on that?
You can go to talkradioNYC.com. talkradioNYC.com. You can listen live at 11 o'clock. Or if you go to Facebook and you look me up on Facebook, or Talk Radio, Talking Alternative Radio, it is on Facebook. You can look at the show there live, or I'm on podcast. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, Prime, all of that. You can find me anywhere.
You're spread thin.
I'm spread thin, but in lots of places, because this message is for everybody.
Absolutely.
And my goal is to have a large impact, and the way I have that large impact is to spread this message of dismantling racism through talking and writing and the coaching and courses that I do.
Well, thank you so much. You're doing a beautiful job, and you are enlightening us again, and your work is important, and you have certainly been called to it, and there's going to be so much more opportunity for us to improve and to get better, I'm hoping.
Thank you, Kate, so much for having me. I really do appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Please come again.
I will.
Thank you.